Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's session, we will look at some coding interview questions that you can expect as part of your Docker. So, if you're attending your DevOps interview, then generally you can expect questions around Docker to write some Docker files or to mention the commands that can be used for certain use cases. So, whether you're preparing for an interview or you're just looking to sharpen your Docker skills, then these questions are designed to push your Docker knowledge. Once again, before I start off with the session, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So let's get started with this. The first question I have is, how do you create a Docker network and connect multiple containers to it? So here basically we will need to create a custom network and then run a couple of containers, more than one containers, and then show how the containers are able to talk to each other. Now, before we can start off with this, we'll have to make sure we have Docker running. So in my case, I'm using a Amazon Linux EC2 instance, and I have already installed Docker in this. If you don't have Docker, then you can use this cm install Docker command. Once Docker is installed, you'll also need to make sure that the Docker service is running, because the daemon needs to start. So if the daemon is not running, then you can use this Docker service start command, which will help you to start the service. So once you have your Docker ready, so to create our network, we can use this command docker network create and then the name of your network. So let's call this as custom network, and this will go ahead and create a new network for us. So we can list the networks, docker network ls, and here is the new network that we have created. So by default, I did not specify the driver, so it will go ahead and create a bridge driver for us. If you want to use any other driver, then you will need to explicitly specify that in the command as an argument. Now, once you have your network ready, we are going to create two containers inside this network. So for that, we will be running this command docker run -dit. We will give it a name and then the network. So I want my container to run in this network and then the image. So we are creating a new container. We are starting it in the interactive. We are giving it a name. We're telling which network the containers should be residing in, and then which image to use. So I'll run this command, and this will go ahead and start a new container for me. So I should have a new container. I'll show that to you. We'll go ahead and create one more container here. So let's simply call this as Alpine 2. And now I should have two containers. Okay, so I have Alpine 1 and then Alpine 2. Now I can inspect the network to basically confirm that both these containers are running in the same network. So Docker network, inspect, and then the name of the network. So custom network, and here you can say I have Alpine 1 and then Alpine 2. All right. So now we have the containers running. So how does the communication between them work? So by default, your bridge network allows the containers to talk to each other. So we'll try to do a ping from one container to other container, and if the connectivity works, the ping will get a response. So let's first connect to the Alpine 1 container. So we'll use this docker exec -it Alpine 1 and then the interpreter. So let me see. Okay, sorry, I should be using bin over here. So I'm inside the container, and let's run this if config command, which will give me the network interfaces. So here is the IP address 172.22.0.2. This is the IP address of Alpine 1 container. Let me exit and connect to the second container, and let's run this if config command, and you will see 172.22.0.3. So I have 02 and then 03. Now let's try doing a ping from the second container. So we'll do a ping, and if you're getting the response, that means the containers are able to talk to each other. All right. The next question we have is, write a Docker file that installs a specific version of Node.js and sets an environment variable. So let's exit from here, and so basically the ask is to create a Docker file, and we'll need to use a very specific version. So let's say version 14, and then we'll also need to set the environment variables to inside the Docker file. So I have this folder created here. Let me delete this Docker file. We'll create a new one. and I have the necessary files for the Node.js. So package.json is essentially what we will need. So let's create a new Docker file over here. So it is the from instruction, which is used to specify the base image. So here, this is where we are specifying the specific version of Node.js that we want to use. So we want to use the 14 version, and we are using a very minimal image, Alpine image. Then we will set our environment variable. So env is what we use to set the environment variables, followed by that your variable name and the value. So env is one way to set your environment variables inside a Docker file. All right. So we are giving a specific version, and then we are also setting our environment variables. And then you can have your subsequent instructions. So I'm setting my work directory. I want to copy the package.json file to the container, and then I want to run the npm install command, and then this is only for production, and then copy rest of the things to the container, and then finally start the Node.js app. All right. So this is essentially from the questions perspective, this is essentially what we require. We are setting the specific version, and then we are setting our environment variable. So let me save this, and if you want, you can go ahead and build that image. Next question we have is, how do you handle a build image using a remote Git repository? So see, we can build your images from the local machine. Like in this case, I have the Docker file in the local machine. So I can say docker build -t, you can give it a name and then the path. So since it's available in the current location, I can use dot. But how do you build images from a Docker file which is available in a Git repository? So let's say, for example, I have this repo over here, and inside this I have this Docker file, and I have very basic instructions. I have just 3 instructions. Ubuntu as my base image, I'm updating it, and then I'm installing Apache 2. Now, how do you build this image from a remote repo? So for this, we will need to have the URL. So we'll get the URL, and the command would remain the same. So docker build -t, and let's call this as git image, and then the path to the repository. Now you will need to have Git available for this. So in my case, I have already installed Git. If you don't have Git, then you will need to install it. But once you have installed it, you should be able to go ahead and run this command, which will basically get the Docker file from the GitHub repository and build an image for us. So here is the image. So you can see here, we are updating the machine, and then I'm installing Apache 2. I'm using Ubuntu as my base image. So whatever the instructions I have in the GitHub repo Docker file, it has executed it. The next question we have is, write a Docker compose file that uses environment variables from a .env file. So basically, create a Docker compose file, but then we want the environment variables to be defined in a separate file, the .env file, and then we'll need to call that variable inside the Docker compose. So for this, we will create a new Docker compose file, so docker compose.yaml, and we will begin with the services. We'll give a name to this, and then the image that we want to use. So let's say we will go with the Node.js image, and then we are setting our environment variable. All right. So the variable name and the value. Now the value for this, we will be defining it outside the Docker compose file. So this is where the value will be stored. So we'll be calling that. And then we can set our ports. So, in case you want this application to run on a certain port number, we can define that as well. So this will use environment variables. Now for this, we will need to create another file, which will be the .env file, and inside this we will be declaring the oh sorry, it looks like I already have it. So there's the variable name and then the value. All right. So essentially, if you look at the Docker compose and then the .env file, so we have declared the variable in a separate file, and then we are calling that in the Docker compose file. So that's basically how we can refer the variables inside a Docker compose file. The next question we have is, how do you cache Docker layers for faster builds in a Docker file? So this is basically how do we speed up the process of building your Docker images, taking lesser time to build your Docker images. Now, the recommended approach to cache the Docker layers is to order the steps that we define in your Docker file. So basically, we will need to have the steps from the least frequently changing steps to most frequently changing steps. So basically, the top down approach, at the top we will need to have the steps that will never change or will be least changing, and then at the bottom we will need to have the steps that will be changing very frequently. That will help you to cache your layers and then help you to speed up the time taken to build your Docker images. So I have a Docker file inside this Node.js. Let me copy that Docker file to the current location. So here I have the Docker file, and let's use that. Now here if you see, so in my case this will not change, this will not change, this will not change, and this may change. So this will basically cache the Docker file, will cache this step for me. So only if the application code changes, the dependencies will be reinstalled. If not, they will not be reinstalled. So basically, have the steps at the top which will not change, and then followed by the steps that are going to change very frequently. The next question we have is, how can you troubleshoot and debug a Docker container that is not starting? So at times, we may start a container. So let's say I'll go ahead and build this. So Docker build -t, and let's say node image. Node image. Okay. So this looks like, okay, I don't have the package.json file. So let me go inside this Node.js and build it over here, because I have all the files available over here. So this will go ahead and build a image for me. So let's wait for this to complete. Shouldn't take much time for this to complete. And done. So my image is built. So Docker images, I should be able to see the new image, and let's start a new container. So Docker run -dit, let's call this as node container, and then the image name. So ideally this should start a new container for me, but here I'm not able to see the container. So we'll use this -a flag, and here you can see the container has exited. Now how do we troubleshoot this? Why this is not running? Why this has failed? So one option is to look at the logs of the container. So we can run this docker logs and then the container name. So here you can see it is giving me the error as to what is happening. So cannot find the module /app/app.js. So basically that's the error. The other way is you can start this container in an interactive shell. So basically get inside the container and then troubleshoot it. So for that, one option you have is using this docker exec-it and then the container ID and your interpreter. Now for this command to work, the container should be running. Okay, if the container is not running, then this will not work. So like in this case, you can see it's giving me an error telling the container is not running. The other way that we can try this is docker run -it, and we'll use this entry point, bin sh, and the node image. So now I'm inside the container, and now you can troubleshoot it to see why the application is, maybe you can take a look at the logs to see what is happening, why this is not working. So you can troubleshoot everything. The last option you have is to inspect the container to basically check the configurations, if there's something missing, something is not working as expected. So we can use this docker inspect and the container ID. So this will give the configuration of your containers, so can validate whether the environment variables are correct or not, if you have passed all the necessary informations and everything. So these commands will help you to diagnose the issues that you're having with your containers, like checking the logs, running a shell inside the container and then checking the container's configuration. The next question we have is write a Docker file that uses ARG and ENV instructions to pass build time and runtime variables. So in one of the previous questions, I told you that ENV is one way that we can set the environment variable. So here, if you see in this particular Docker file, I'm using ENV. Now we can also use ARG. So there are two ways that you can pass variables to your Docker file. One is using the ARG instruction and the other is using the ENV instruction. Now what's the difference between them? ARG can be the variables, the values can be passed during the runtime, and this is during the build time. The other way to understand this is the values for your variables defined in ENV will be declared inside the Docker file and you cannot override it. But with your ARG, you can override it and you can pass the values to this from the command line. I'll show you an example for this. So let's say we will set a variable over here. So I've set a variable using ARG. I've also set a variable using ENV. Now, when I'm building an image, so Docker build -t and let's say ARG image demo. I can use this -build -arg, the variable name and then the value. So I can override this. Okay, so I can do that with your ARG variables, but I cannot do it with your ENV instructions. The next question we have is how do you remove all dangling images in Docker? So dangling images are basically the images that are corrupted or the images that are unfinished. So if you want to delete them, we have a command. So we can use this Docker image prune and then we can use this -f, which is for force. So what this will essentially do is this will go through the list of your images. It will see the images which are corrupted or which are incomplete and it will delete those images and give you the space back. So in my case, when I run this, so at this point I don't have any dangling images, so I basically got 0 bytes. But if you had any dangling images, you'll get the space back. So for that you can use this particular command. The next question we have is write a Docker command to restart a container automatically if it fails. So for this, we can use this command the argument -restart, and then I want to restart this on failure, and then how many times do you want to restart it? Okay, so this is what we can use to tell Docker that hey, I want to restart the container automatically if there is a failure. You can specify the numbers, how many times do you want to try the restart, and then we will give the image name. So this will essentially try, so you can see restarting, so it will try to automatically restart the containers. It will try 5 times and after that it will exit. All right, so that's basically how we can restart a container automatically whenever it fails. The next question we have is how do you set up a Docker container to run as a non-root user? Now, by default, whenever we are creating a Docker file, when we are defining the instructions, all the instructions by default gets executed as a root user. So in this case, all these instructions are executing as a root user. But if you want any instructions to run as a non-root user, you can do that as well. So for that, we have a user instruction that we can use. Now before that, we will need to create a non-root user. So we will go ahead and create a non-root user. So we'll use the run instruction for that. So in this case, we are creating a group. All right, so let's call this as node app. That's my group name. And then I want to add my user. So let's say node user and add the user to this node app group. So step 1 is to create our user. So in this case, we are creating a group. Node app is our group. And then we are creating our user, node user, and then we are adding that user to this group. And then post that, we will use this user instruction to set our user. Now, once you set the user, the subsequent instructions will get executed as that user. All right. Until here, all the instructions will get executed as a root user. but once you set the user, the subsequent instructions will execute as a non-root user. So that's basically how you can run your instructions as a non-root user. And that brings us to the end of our Docker coding interview questions. I hope you found these questions helpful and helped you better understand some of the more intricate aspects of your Docker. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon for updates whenever I upload new content. Please leave your comments in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.